Hello. Hello and welcome. All right. So let me see if I can get us started on college admissions trends due to COVID. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. Thank you so much for joining me about just kind of everything that has changed in admissions this past year. Let me start by introducing myself. My name's Josephine. I am college admissions consultant. I started Strive to Learn, but let's talk about today's topics. I am going to go over the test optional and test free movements and what that means. We're also going to discuss increase in applications and how that may have an effect on your own college application. We're going to talk about accessibility to colleges and college knowledge and the importance of context on your application. So basically, I'm going to go a little more in depth on a lot of the things that Ed kind of touched upon in that first presentation you had today. So let's start by talking about the monster of standardized test changes. No one is a huge fan of these. So let's talk about the small changes first. So we had some SAT changes in January of 2021. The SAT reasoning test, which is the regular SAT that people talk about, suddenly dropped its essay. So that also means that colleges no longer require the essay, since it would be unfair to students who are taking the SAT. Since they cannot take an essay, it no longer exists. Now, the other thing that the SAT changed, the College Board, or the test makers, they dropped all of the SAT subject tests. It is no longer possible to take any SAT subject tests. And the reason they did that was because they decided that there was so much overlap with AP tests, they would rather just focus on AP tests and decrease the stress that students found themselves in, wondering whether they should be taking AP and subject tests, right? Testing is just kind of layered and layered and layered. So they decided to just get rid of one portion. So a lot of tests were canceled. A lot of current seniors may have only been able to test recently, depending on which state you're coming to us from. If you're in California, then you know that only 16% of sites were available compared to the previous year. That's quite a change, right? So let's see how universities started dealing with that change. What have they changed in their college admissions responses? So there are two big responses. A lot of universities went test optional and others went test blind, or they might also call this test free. So let's talk about test blind, test free first. I'm a huge fan of Friends, so how to use this GIF, although it is a bit distracting. Test blind or test free means that your SAT or ACT score will not be considered as part of your college application at all. An example of schools that are now test free permanently are the UCs. A lot of schools went test optional, but some went test free. So these are the test free schools. The Cal States are also test free for this year and the coming year. After that, they're still going to make up their minds whether they're going to stay that way. So this is really important because that means that you can take this test as many times as you want and send the UCs 100 score reports. They will not factor this into their application decision. You might have started filling out a UC application and seen that they do ask you. There's a spot where you could still put your SAT or ACT score, but just know that that portion of your application will not be visible to anyone looking at your admissions decision. So the only time they would see your test score would be after you've already enrolled. So not only did they offer you admission, but you also decided to enroll, then they can see those scores and might be able to use them for course placement. So don't be scared or freaked out about skipping that question. It will not hurt you in the least. And even if you put scores there, they're not going to look at them until you've enrolled. Let's come to the bigger monster, the test optional monster. So test optional is test optional. It means it is optional to submit your test. There is no better or worse way. So path one would be to apply with an SAT or ACT score. So let's say you took the SAT or ACT, you're proud of your score. For a test optional university, and there are a lot of test optional universities, you can apply with that score. It can boost your application. But let's say either you weren't able to test or you had better things to do. You wanted to join some clubs and you wanted to focus on your grades, or maybe you struggle a bit with standardized tests and they just really don't show your true academic ability. Then you can apply without the SAT or ACT. It does not matter. let's focus a little bit on that path too, applying without the SAT or ACT, because I think we all know what it's like to apply with the test scores, since that is the majority of what everyone has been used to for the last few years. So one of the things I want to just say about this is that there is no disadvantage to not submitting your scores when it comes to admission purposes. But depending on the university, there might be some possible disadvantages. No one's going to say that outright, but we have seen that some scholarships, honors colleges, or accelerated degree options do still require test scores. So just really make sure to check the universities that you're interested in, whether or not they require them. So a test optional overall school might still say, hey, if you're interested in applying to our honors college, then we want to see a test score. So just keep an eye out for that as you're applying. Now, test optional is not a new thing. It is something that has been tried and true. And I think this is really important to know. The first university that went test optional was Bowdoin College in 1969. That was quite a while ago. And by March 2020, so this is pre-pandemic, prior to the beginning of the pandemic, about 38% of US universities were test optional. So this isn't new. It is just a little bit less publicly known, and it really came to the forefront of the public sector, I would say, through the big test optional movement that was really kind of pushed into motion, I would say, by the pandemic, where it turned from 38% to much higher. And I'm going to talk about that in just a second. But I do want to point out that 25% of the top 250 national universities were test optional prior to the pandemic. And of the top 100 national liberal arts colleges, over 50% were test optional. This includes highly selective universities, such as the University of Chicago, with a 5 to 7% acceptance rate, depending on the year that you're applying, what has been test optional. So this is not a new thing. It has been tried and true. There was a catalyst for the test optional movement. So when universities saw that a lot of students couldn't take the tests, or could take them only once, or were just heavily impacted on their ability to have access to these tests, they decided to go test optional. So pre-pandemic was 38% of universities. Then during the pandemic, it was raised to 65% of all universities went to either test optional or test blind. There's a link here in this presentation, but you can also Google it. If you just Google Fair Test, test optional, you will get to fairtest.org, and they have a running list of schools that are test optional, and they will constantly update it. Every 2 to 3 days, they update their list. So it's a great place to go to check which universities are test optional. Now for 2023 applicants, if we have some juniors here in this presentation, just know that it's probably not going to be all of these universities that will remain test optional. Some may go back to test required, but some may remain test optional. So a lot of universities did a trial run for 1 or 2 years and are still figuring out whether they want to make it permanent. And that's the thing. So I do think more institutions will remain test optional than there were pre-COVID, but I don't think it's going to stay above the 65%. Yet I don't have a crystal ball, so prove me wrong. I hope that most of them stay test optional. It's a really quite wonderful thing. Now you might think, what's in it for the universities, right? Because it sounds like kind of a too good to be true. Hey, if your score is good, submit it. But if your score is not so great, you don't need to show it. So let me tell you, these universities start looking a lot more selective. The universities that have a test optional process have lower acceptance rate because they receive a lot more applications, because suddenly we've removed that barrier of testing. And when they have more applications but still admit only the same number of students, it drives their acceptance rate down. They also usually have an increase in average SAT or ACT scores. Let's say you scored a 1200 and have a 4.6 GPA, and you felt like the 1200 is really not showing what I'm capable of doing. My GPA is a much better predictor of my academic success, so I'm not going to submit my 1200. But let's say you have a 3.0 GPA and you scored a 1450. Then that test score can really stand out and show, well, you know what, when I really put my mind to it in a testing situation, I can do it, I can perform. So then you may submit that score. This means that the students who do choose to submit their scores usually have scores they're proud of. So the average SAT, ACT scores of admitted applicants increase. This allows universities to rank higher in national rankings because of the lower acceptance rate and the increase in scores. So that's kind of what's in it for the universities. I just think that's important to know. A lot of people think it might be, tricking them. This is no trick. It truly is test optional. Test optional means it's optional. Here's some examples. Emory received an increase of 18% in applications. I believe Ed earlier in the session mentioned that Colgate's applicants doubled, but of course Colgate is not taking double the amount of admits, right? UCLA saw a 28% increase in applications. Harvard saw a 20% increase in applications. So who are these people? Who is applying? A lot of times we have students from underrepresented backgrounds because going test optional helped level the playing field and remove barriers to college access. Now, we can't attribute this increase to only test optional. I think another big thing that research has found, that several studies have found, is that these admission trends went in that direction because of the uncertainty and a lot of students kind of applying with a YOLO mindset and wanting to throw an application at highly selective schools just to see what sticks. So that is another thing that did truly. All right, let's talk about some admissions trends. So first off, this I think is very important. And I may say this twice. A majority of US colleges admit most students who apply. So the majority admit the majority of students that apply, right? And that's what Ed was showing us in that very first presentation today, that there are the highly selective colleges, but there's not that many of them. Those are names that we've all heard, but that is not the majority of US colleges. Actually, if we take a look at this study from the Pew Research Center, about 80% of US colleges admit 50% or more of applicants to their institution. 50% or more admitted by 80% of US institutions. So that's really exciting. That's really uplifting. That means there are a lot of universities out there who would love to have you join them. Now let's take a deeper look at the admissions trends. Let's take a look at these over here. So we can see, if we compare 2019 to 2021, we can see that for some of them it went up over time, and for some of them it went down, right? Like Reed College actually saw an increase in admission rate every year, going from 35% to 39 to 42, while Boston University stayed about the same, 19, 19, 18, versus Georgetown was a little all over the place, 14, 16, 11, right? And I think it's very important to think about what we learned in our first presentation today, which is that there are other factors that have nothing to do with the student that change the acceptance rate, right? Did we just add a new physics building and therefore are looking for more physics majors? That can change that acceptance rate and who is accepted. It's not necessarily a reflection of the student's value or worth. So let's take a look at this. So we have more students applying to very selective schools, which leads to a drop in acceptance rate, right? We had an example of Harvard dropping from 6.5 to 3.4, Columbia from 6.1 to 3.7. So we have fewer students are applying to less prestigious schools and more students applying to highly selective scores. So overall, of all students in the US applying, there's actually only a 2% increase of students applying overall. Just that each student is submitting to more universities, including the universities they usually would not have tried, that YOLO aspect of applications that I just talked about. So Harvard application saw a 57% increase, Yale a 38% increase, MIT a 66% increase. Those are increases from the prior year. One of the things that we do see though is that 20% more first generation college students applied to the big selective schools. So those with the lowest average acceptance rates, as did 24% more Black, Latinx, American Indian, or Alaska Native and Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander students compared to last year. And then international applicants to US colleges in general also increased by 10%. We can also take a look here at the UC admissions trends for those of us who are in California. And we can see that they're also a little bit all over the board, right? We do see a drop in the highly selective ones. So Berkeley dropped 17 to 15. We have Irvine dropping a little bit, 30 to 29. LA, UCLA, 14 to 11, right? Big drop, big drop. It came from Santa Barbara, 37% down to 29. But we also have some that remained about the same. Like I said, Irvine remained about the same. Davis actually increased by 3% points. And Merced also increased by 3 percent points. So there's some good stuff here too. And I always encourage students to really take a look at fit. Like this is really about looking at what college fits me, not just which one is most selective. Let me throw my application there, but really thinking about how can I succeed there? And what do I really want to do? As far as accessibility and the changes that COVID has wrought, geographic distance is no longer a really prohibitive factor when it comes to connecting with and visiting colleges. And in the next session, we do have a college visit. I'm going to be in that one as well. So I will see you there and I will talk more about this, but just to touch on it briefly, a lot of colleges, since you couldn't do a campus visit for over a year, right? They started doing virtual information sessions. They also gave virtual tours, even virtual walking tours where a student is physically walking the campus with a computer, with the camera, and walking the students along. They have student panels online, all kinds of stuff. So it's really exciting because you have the ability to have these Zoom meetings to connect with regional reps. Just like Ed was saying, you know, those are the people who will actually be reading your application. You also have the opportunity to get to know students there. It's a lot easier to connect, which is really great because cost is no longer a prohibitive factor in college visits. We will go into that much more in the next session. So let me move on to context. We talked a little bit in that first session about what actually matters when you apply to college. Emotional intelligence is something I want to touch upon. This is something that colleges are really looking for. And what is part of that? Social skills, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, self-awareness. These are soft skills that really matter. So admissions reps are looking more and more for very resilient students that have maturity, independence, the ability to reflect on their life experiences. It's a great predictor of college success, as several studies have shown. Here's a quote, and I linked the source if you'd like to read the study. We will be sending out the slides as well. It's really, really interesting kind of how colleges are looking for these and how they really understand that academics aren't the only factor that will make you successful once you hit the ground on their campus. So how does this factor into the college applications? So for the UCs, they have a 13-factor comprehensive review, and several parts of that comprehensive review actually look for those soft skills. There's also the addition of an optional COVID essay prompt that did not exist prior to the pandemic. The UCs didn't add that, but the Common App added that. And over 900 universities in the US utilize the Common App portal for their applications. And then this is something that has always existed for pretty much all colleges that accept any form of written essay. We have the additional information essay prompt. So this is an opportunity to really provide context to your grades and your transcript, to tell them about yourself and what's been going on in your life. You may not have been able to do the things that you're passionate about, and that may have led to you feeling pretty stressed out and maybe a bit depressed, being cooped up at home for a whole year. So, you know, admissions reps also went through COVID. They get it. They were sitting at home and they were trying to, you know, focus on their work while their cat was dancing on their head and their toddlers were pulling on their legs. So we were all stressed out. So just know the admissions reps are not going to penalize you because maybe you had a drop in activities during your sophomore or junior year when the pandemic hit. So find value in those things that you were able to do instead of obsessing over the things that COVID canceled, and show that value and that reflection in your college application. Show insight into those things, why they were valuable to you. You can do that in your personal statement, or you can do that in any of these additional information essays. So for example, maybe your grandma moved in and you helped care for her. That's something that you should reflect on your college application. They want to know about these things. All right. Here's some resources. Here's that list of test optional colleges. And I also linked all of this here again for you guys. We have a wonderful podcast where we go in depth on similar topics. And for example, we have one that just came out, an episode on how to write your personal statement. So that might be a really great one to listen to if you're thinking about applying to college. Here's my contact information. You can also scan that QR code. And one of the most important things I just want to say before we end, or before I jump to the Q&A, is that we do have our feedback survey, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you thought of this presentation and the other presentations. But we do have a few minutes left for Q&A. So Kevin and Kathy, you can unmute your audio if you'd like. You can turn on your camera if you'd like. You don't have to. It's totally up to you, but we have about 7 minutes left if you'd like to ask me some specific questions.
I have a quick question. How do we get access to this presentation? Because there's a lot of great links in there. That would be great.
Yeah. We'll email that out to you, but why don't you chat me your email right now so that I can triple check that it all went out to you. So just pop that in the chat for me. We should be emailing everything to everyone, and there will also be links to recordings. It'll probably take us till the beginning of next week to get that out to you, because we're going to link everything in one doc so that it's really easy to access. I was talking about the additional information essay. So if you weren't able to watch, to attend William's session right before this one on the optional essays, I highly recommend that one to watch the recording of that one. Like I said, we should get that out to you. Okay, and I'm just writing your email out just to make sure I have it. But feel free to ask me any other questions. I'm glad that you found this helpful. And I love providing resources. So if you're ever wondering like, oh, where can I find X, Y, and Z, please just shoot me an email and I'll see if I can send you some things. And our blog is a great resource, as is our podcast.
Josephine, can I ask you, this is like actually a really unfair question, and like doesn't even, probably you're going to say, well, that depends on a whole lot of different things, but is it in general more competitive to get, are the acceptance rates more competitive now since COVID, or less so, just as a general trend across all of the universities?
I would say, so I can't say it in general because we see kind of an opposite trend. In the top 50 colleges of the nation, acceptance rates have dropped significantly. Now, in the colleges that accept, that are still considered moderately to somewhat selective, so those are the colleges that have around 50% acceptance rate or higher, those have seen an increase in admission rates and a drop in applicants. So what that means is that you are more likely to get accepted to a college that isn't one of the top 50. And you're probably more likely to be able to qualify for a merit scholarship or other financial help at those colleges. So I really urge students to keep an open mind, and a lot of them have opened their minds a lot, to really consider colleges based on fit. What fits you? Where can you, dive into what you want to dive in? Where can you join a computer gaming club if that's what you're into right now? Where do you not hate the weather? Where would you actually want to live for 4 years? Where do you feel like you can find your people? So really focusing on all of the aspects that would make the student successful, rather than trying to focus on a name or a thought or something I heard my best friend say, and so now I'm going to go for it too.
Right. Thank you. That helps a lot. I think it's a tough situation because obviously as parents, and I'm a first time, my oldest now is entering this arena. And I feel like we're kind of hung up on that name still, right? Or, you have to get into one of the UCs because that'll be a really great school and a really great value because we live here in California. And, these are things that are like weighing on my mind. And if the acceptance rates are going down for those schools, then that's, obviously just a really great moment to force the conversation in a different direction.
Yeah, I think you bring up some really good points there too. One of the things, were you potentially in Rachel's session on college prestige and success?
Yes.
Okay. So I love Malcolm Gladwell and kind of the analysis that he does. Yeah.
It was great.
So take a look at David and Goliath, his book, if you want to read a little bit more into it, because he really goes in depth. That presentation that he gave, that Rachel kind of used as a discussion point, is based on that book. So highly recommend reading David and Goliath. He gives some excellent case studies across the board. And what I think is really important is, first of all, if you're saying UCs, you're right. They're a wonderful value. And they have the middle class scholarship. They have a lot of different opportunities to bring costs down. So I really urge you to take a look and go and visit the UCs. They have in most of them, almost all of them except one, I believe, have in-person visit opportunities again. And come January, all of them will have that. You may just have to sign up like a month or two in advance because they'll fill up really quickly. But visit the ones that maybe you don't know that much about. Go ahead and, visit Merced, visit Riverside. These universities have excellent programs that a lot of people are very surprised by when they go. They're like, wow, some of my students are just like, wow, I love this university. How did I not know that much? Why do I only hear about UCLA and Berkeley and UCI? And so really, or Santa Barbara, I mean, everyone loves partying. So no, I'm just kidding. Of course. It's a great school. But I mean, that, it helps with the attraction.
I totally get it.
So definitely, broaden their mind or try to take your child to the other UCs. I think it's really important. Yeah. And then one of the things that I always say is I graduated debt-free. It was really important to me.